Yo, what's up, Meg? How you doing?
Hey, I'm good.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us. Folks, I'm super pumped to have Meg here today. A little bit more about her here in a second, but while folks kind of trickle in here, um, any big plans for this upcoming weekend? Or any kind of travel coming up?
No travel,
No
just
travel.
working through some personal admin, as I like to call it, wrapping up a house renovation and getting ready for a wedding in a couple weeks. So good stuff.
Yeah. Every time someone who's a software person goes through a house renovation, this is like the trap. They're always like most of my friends always are like, oh my God, there needs to be like way better software for this. And so like it's like a trap of like, oh, there should be a better tool for this. And like, what you don't want to have is to go off and build that, because then getting the contractors to use
Well,
it would be an adoption barrier.
that's for sure. I tried to explain like project management to my contractor, and she was not pleased with that. So
You're like, hey, we're gonna do some Gantt charts. She's like, and yeah, no. Did
yep.
you want me to quit? Awesome. I love it. Well, let's go ahead and get started here. Wanted to welcome everyone to Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanji, and so Power Hours are really interactive, really interactive session. And so what we want you to do is use the chat panel, leverage Q&A panel if you'd like. We have a really fantastic person, illustrious revenue operations thought leader here to joining us in the form of Meg. She's at your disposal. So if you have burning questions regarding revenue operations and kind of sales excellence that are kind of like keeping you up at night, that's what she and I are here for. We also have questions that were submitted ahead of time. So I'm really pumped to have her. So for folks who aren't familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. So MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, related disciplines, et cetera. And the community's mission is pretty straightforward. It's to create an environment for our 27,000 and growing members to answer questions that they struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about. In general, just get better. Meg, you're an MSP OG, I want to say,
I think I
right?
am. I mean, yeah. When did it get started? I've been around for a while.
I was gonna say, like, I think like 2016. Oh, sorry, like we started doing salons in 2016, and I think that like, yeah, you might have come to one of the early like New York ones. So we gotta get those. We gotta get the in-person. Well, we actually just had two in-person ones in San Francisco and New York associated with our last virtual summit. So but yeah, so the way that MSP helps our community get better is through great live sessions like this one, our robust online forum, which is a lovely Q&A environment for people that like answer the questions that might be bugging them, and of course in-person events. And so folks who weren't previously members, we'll go ahead and add you after this event. And so before we get started, and so we're not here to talk through like slides or whatever. We're here to pick the brain of the person, our illustrious guest here. So like, let's make use of that as much as possible. We're here to learn, so please do ask your questions. And so with that, like maybe we can get into some introductions here. I'll make mine really quick because Meg is more the focus here. I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. The quick and dirty on Atrium is that we make data-driven sales management software that exists to help sales managers like AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers use metrics and data to improve the performance of their reps and their team. So we're big sales nerds over here. Prior to starting Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called Talentbin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And that's like really where I kind of like cut my teeth with respect to sales and sales excellence, because I was the founder of Talentbin, and then I was our first rep when I figured out the software doesn't sell itself and someone needed to sell it. And that was me. Then our sales manager leader, and then ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and started Modern Sales Pro. So do a little thinking about sales. And then one of the things that's really lovely about my job is I get to meet really rad people who are super thoughtful modern sales practitioners themselves. And Meg is a fantastic example of that. So Meg, why don't you introduce yourself and maybe give folks a little bit of like context on your last couple roles, and then we can kind of get into some of the questions.
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, really excited to be here today and happy Friday. So my background, I kind of grew up, I like to say, with MongoDB. I was the 24th employee there really early in my career, and got the chance to just grow with that business right up until it was about to go public. When I left, it was about 700 people and about 8 months from that public date. So really amazing growth. I think we'll talk about some of the cool learnings there. It was open source software. We had a very thoughtful developer play that then transitioned to going up market. But my focus there was marketing ops. We bought a marketing automation platform early on, and I just wanted to own it. I thought that seemed like something I could do. And that's how I learned the world of operations. That's where I got really close to sales operations, sales enablement, did a ton of work on kind of teaching the field how to use all those leads that we're sending over for marketing. I went over to JW Player after that, was really interested to actually have more of that revenue go-to-market operations view, not just in one area like marketing, and got to spend 2.5 years there building basically operations from the ground up. The company had been around for quite a time, but had never really invested in that. So a lot of learnings there. And then I decided to kind of do something different, but still fast and growing. And so I went to AWS and spent 3 years there doing a variety of kind of different operational leadership roles and a lot of very different size of business than I had ever seen, but a lot of similarities to the startup world. And just 3 months ago, I jumped over to Vanta. I'm over there running what we call go-to-market operations, as well as our finance and strategy teams. So excited to be here.
Love Vanta, love the Vanta squad. Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us, Meg. And that's so funny about MongoDB. So like when you joined there, you weren't, you weren't joining as a sales operations person. You were kind of like a general operations like associate, whatever. And you just imagine you guys bought Marketo. Is that what have been the one? Or
my
you just tackled it?
My first job out of school was running Vice magazine's office. So that was in Vice, 100 people, all of kind of their fame now. And it was crazy. It was a crazy job. But I realized I thought I wanted to be in the media or fashion world. And I realized I didn't really want to be in that world. It was more of a personal interest than a professional one, but I loved being in business. And so Mongo hired me to basically do the same job I did there, which was set up the office, do third-party payroll and HR systems. And so that was just kind of come help grow this thing. And then, then we bought Marketo, and it was does anyone have time to deal with Marketo? I made the case that I did, so.
Yeah, it's this thing is really hard to use and full of razor blades. And who wants that? Meg's like, ooh, me, me. Yeah, I think there's a really good. I think there's a really good lesson there. And so, I mean, this is not necessarily related to revenue operations or modern sales per se, but I think it's related to startups, which is a lot of the folks who join us here are in fast growth pace companies. Usually high quality, what I call high quality human capital, when it ends up in an organization where there's just so many things to do, invariably you will find you will grow, right? And I think this is a really good example of that. Over here at we call it go-to operations team, which is kind of a misnomer. It's more like a biz ops team. It literally started out with this who does to kind of help with a number of, literally the original use case was so one of the things that's kind of cool about Atrium is it takes 3 minutes to set up. Someone just signs in with their CRM with Salesforce, and then what ends up happening is there's a 24-hour turnaround while the data syncs, but then also we do some manual data checks on the back end just to make sure that everything's hunky-dory and whatever. And so AEs used to do that, and then we got to the point where the AEs had turning on so many accounts that it was creating a problem. It was creating a logjam for them to do those data checks themselves. And so we hired someone and then that team just has grown because they just take tasks, any recurring task that a bright human being can do, if it's scripted or playbooked, and they just gobble them up, and the entire organization loves them. They're oh my god, GTM ops, they're the best, right? And
the Swiss Army knife. Yeah
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, let's talk about Mongo a bit there, because like, I mean, there's obviously like a pretty, big arc there. Started out as a developer tool. I mean, it is a developer tool, but like started out as like on-prem developer, moved to cloud, had like a PLG open source motion, and then added, I mean, Mongo is the company, the thinly veiled company in The Qualified Sales Leader, which of course is John McMahon's excellent book. So like, yeah, I would love to like hear some of the biggest learnings that kind of came out of that long kind of arc that you had there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think one of the biggest ones, and I'm re-remembering it now, being back in the startup world, is like you can build systems and processes to the best of your ability and even try to like force yourself to think of that next big growth spurt, but you're just going to break
Mhm.
it. Like you're going to build and you're break and you're build and you're break. And I think
Yeah,
it's it's healthy, and it's sometimes it's really
yeah,
hard when you're in those positions and you're getting all that like onslaught from the field that something's not working, but it's just very true. And it's all part of the growth story. So if you're building stuff that is continuing steady state and your business is tripling in size in certain periods, like something, either you're like a genius or something might not be going totally right there. So I learned a lot about that.
yeah,
And also
yeah.
just
And I
try
think
to be,
it's
yeah,
like
sorry, go.
give yourself permission. It's like give yourself permission for that to be okay. Like, hey, look, it's like things are gonna break. Um, it couldn't break the next week after you ship it,
Yeah, yes,
right? But like they will break. And then I think actually I would even maybe make that a little bit more strenuous and say, if it's not breaking in 6 months, maybe not 6 months, in 12 months or whatever, maybe you put too much, like maybe you put too much into it. And what I mean by that is like, one of the metaphors that I like to use with revenue operations is like product management and like of the sales organization, and the same
yeah,
kind of stuff applies with like product, where and like technical debt and whatever. Like you can, if you over architect something and make it so robust that you like overbuild, well, what you just did was you spent a bunch of engineering resources on something that like you overbuilt,
right.
right? And so it's almost like a healthy thing if like something needs to be refactored like every 12 months or whatever, because like that would indicate that like you did an appropriate like MVP version of it, so you could move
Right.
on to the next project, right?
Totally. Yeah, and I think there's also a piece of hyper growth where you just have to be creative and come up with new ideas constantly. And I think
Mm-hmm.
part of that, like kind of breaking and reevaluating, is just like breeds that, right? Like you're never going to get to perfect because the
Yeah.
problem's going to move down the line, and it just keeping that as part of your pace and your working style.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you just have to be mindful of like how because this is the other thing that I think we're going to talk about as relates to like, coming into an organization and like assessing what the situation is. But there's an infinite number of things that can be done. Like I call them like product or like feature requests, right? There's
Yeah.
an infinite number of feature requests for enhancing a sales organization. And usually there's an infinite number of, hopefully there's not an infinite number of bugs, but like there's so many that it feels infinite. It might as well be
Yeah.
infinite. Like there's always bugs, right? And so if you're going too deep on something to have like, oh man, we have to have like the perfect territory model and it has to be like perfectly balanced like XYZ, what that means is that like you're just not implementing CPQ,
Right.
or you're not like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like there's always the other things that are like it's the opportunity cost there. So you just have to be
Yeah.
mindful of that. What were you gonna say? The other thing? What I interrupted you earlier
Oh
around
no,
Mongo.
the creative piece, just like being like constantly thinking of new avenues and ways to do things, and like especially with like, and this is really from that marketing operations perspective, but how do you keep feeding the sales team? How do you keep improving your MQLs, or how do you get more creative with the demand that you're driving? So that was just, I said that before in a little bit with the process way, but it was just that it's a relentless kind of obsession to come up with new ideas and new approaches.
Yeah, continuous improvement and continuous enhancement. Like one of my favorite books, The Goal, a process of continuous improvement. I think that it's one thing for that stuff to happen organically, but were there mechanisms by which you kind of like wove that into the operating rhythm in order to make sure that like there were places to like reflect and say like, hey, what ought we be doing differently and what have you. Like a lot of organizations will do like quarterly planning and maybe like run on a sprint schedule and what have you. How did you guys approach that?
Gosh, I would love to say we had a super organized approach. We definitely were really always in tight step with sales leadership as a marketing team, and having be it like a pipeline meeting or just kind of having those forums to say, hey, here's what marketing's doing, what we think the impact's going to be, and getting those feedback loops of, okay, how did that work for you? That was, I don't know if it was much more organized than that, to be honest. And we did have a lot of growth and change in sales leadership, which I think also pushed us to like keep thinking in new and different ways.
Well, I think one thing, I'm a big operating rhythms guy, and so like we have a saying at Atrium that like calendar is destiny, and so like if you don't have the place, like if you don't have the space on the calendar in order to address something, and then moreover, like it's even like within that time, like what is the agenda of the meeting. I actually just refactored our sales team meeting. I put a lot of emojis in the bullets. I was very proud of myself.
Yeah, those are effective.
You gotta spice it up. You gotta keep it fun, right? So I refactored our sales team meetings agenda. We have a GTM leads like team leads agenda. So like, essentially our operating rhythm is like Monday morning. We got a 9 a.m. start with like my VP of sales, one of our sales, essentially anybody who's a lead. So like VP of sales, sales manager, head of customer success, head of marketing, head of SDR manager. And that's like a 30-minute meeting that has like things that are like, it has some key metrics associated with it, but it's more like situational awareness. Like here's what's going to happen this week, and like here's what you need to know about it that like might wrong foot you, and what have you. And then we have our sales team meeting actually has marketing. It has SDR and marketing in it as well. And essentially the agenda just has like, it's all shot throughout with like, we actually prepare for it on Sunday night. And it just has like hyperlinks to like a bunch of Atrium reports and like dashboards and whatever. And like, and then also like HubSpot, we're on HubSpot, not Marketo, like HubSpot reports and whatever. And you just like, what you do is you just fold in all that data, and then that's like present. Like, and so the ritual is like, okay, cool. We filled out all that data. And then while we were doing it, we were thinking about it like, ooh, man, op inflow like went down like last week. That's weird. Like, let's create an action item here to like discuss that in this meeting. And then like it just, but by virtue of the fact that you're doing that process, it then engenders the like, oh, wait a minute, or like, oh, that's rad. Can we do more of that? And then of course, like then you potentially persist those off as, oh, this is a really important bug to tackle, or oh, maybe we can like put some more wood behind that arrow. And actually, to your point about like refactoring what is broken, I just refactored those meetings because they'd had the same agenda for the last like year or so, and it was like, and we've like tripled the size of the sales organization in the meantime. So it was like, and so like you had to, it was kind of like, hey, this isn't working anymore, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, creating that operating rhythm, and especially like breaking it down to the component of like, what is a week for an AE, what is a day for an AE, and then being able to have that consistency. That was actually really big for us at MongoDB. We really had to turn up our outbound motion as we were going up market and setting up territories. And so our sales leader at the time, Carlos Delatorre, came in and it was like PG Tuesdays. So everything in the week was leading up to pipeline generation Tuesday, and everything kind of following it. And so it was like, on Tuesday,
it had its own rhythm.
Yeah. And like you're prepping for this. Friday, you're cleaning out your pipe. On Monday, you're taking the marketing messaging and you're coming up with your cadences. And then Tuesday, you're just hitting the phones. And like, it would be great. Like every sales manager would be on that floor with that team hitting the phones too. And then, Wednesdays follow up into those meetings, and watching that roll out across a pretty large sales org at that time. And I had the opportunity to teach the team how to do prospecting because I had all this marketing ops knowledge. So here's where you need to be researching. Here's how to look at marketing activity. Here's how to like find those hot leads in your account. And it was pretty amazing to see that transition. It took time, but to really create that like very structured and scheduled team. And what helped on the leadership and the system side is you now have predictability and try to trust in your op data to be able to identify, like you said, those issues.
Calendar is destiny, right? Like, oh, we should do some more AE. We see this with our customers, right? Because the way that they approach like Atrium is like there are key initiatives that people end up, wanting to measure. Right now,
Right.
Eventually what ends up happening is like you use Atrium to measure like all manner of things, like dozens and dozens of initiatives, whatever. But usually someone's got like a bee in their bonnet about like something, right? Like AE self-sourcing is as an example, or pipeline hygiene, right? Or like SDR quality or what have you. And it's funny, like we see this a lot where like we'll come into an organization and they'll be like, oh, we have a big initiative around like AE self-sourcing or whatever. And then like you look at the data and it's like, but it's not happening at all. And then they're like, oh, damn. And then what that does, I mean, that's an important thing, right? Like first you have awareness, like, oh, damn, right? And then what you can do is you say, oh, okay, we have to prescribe the solution to that, which might be like, oh, well, like just asking account executives to go and like do self-sourcing is like maybe the top 10% or top 20% of like go-getters will just do it on their own and they'll like figure it out or whatever. But then there's like the other 80% of the organization.
Already doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but like it's the other 80% that we have to worry about. And so then it's like, cool, where is the space on the calendar? Do they have accounts that are in their name?
Right.
How do we get to, how do they identify the contacts in those accounts? Do they have the relevant like Zoom info licenses or, fill in the blank, right? Oh, do they actually know how to use SalesLoft, right? Or outreach or whatever, right? And like, and so, this is just like, prototypical revenue operations thing where you just kind of keep pulling on the thread to see like where the constraint is. It's like, so why are we not doing this right here? Everybody has like time blocked on Tuesday in order to do it. But at the end of the day, I see in Atrium that you have not sent any emails or made any calls today. So can you help me understand what's going on there? Oh yeah, I spent the whole time like cleaning my account objects. Oh, that's interesting. Like, why is that? Oh, because, a bunch of these were unqualified. Oh, wonderful. I wonder why we assigned unqualified accounts to, and like, let's debug debug that. But then the first step, of course, is like awareness that like, something may not be happening. But I love, how big was the sales organization when you deployed that initiative?
I feel like I'll say a number, it'll be wrong. I don't think it was more than 100. Like, but maybe it was more like 50, but maybe it was more like 50. I mean, I didn't write these numbers down.
50,
so
I mean, 50 to 100, like deploying an initiative, like I'll give you our SDR function is like pretty slamming here at Atrium. And like we do a bunch of like really creative kind of like outbound campaigns because like we do a pretty good job with content. But at the same time, we're now at the point where we have like, I think it was like 13 AEs or 14 AEs. And so there's like, some of them are having like, 20 customer facing meetings, 15 to 20 customer facing meetings a week. And so, like pretty loaded, like pretty fully utilized. Right. And then you have others where it can be like a little bit wobbly. And so then is have that kind of like self-sourcing capability. It requires like a bunch of precursor, like our SDR team uses outreach, but our sales leaders from SalesLoft, so our AEs are now using SalesLoft. It's hilarious. We have like a mixed she knows how to administer it well, but it's like, okay, do you have the accounts? What we identified was like, sourcing contacts is probably not a great use of AE time, right?
Yeah.
So we actually have an offshore team that does a bunch of work for our SDR function, but like for whatever reason wasn't doing the same thing over here. And so like rolling that out, like that new muscle out around like, 13 AEs is like one thing. Rolling it out for like 100, 100 AEs is like a whole nother thing. How did you stage that out?
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering correctly, we definitely did a big like command of the message value selling launch with force management. And I think that was like a sales kickoff. And this is a part of this was also just making the boot camp for new hires like a in-person week-long event. And so that prospecting training was part of that. And so I think it was, I might be it's a ways away now, but like I think that was basically we like did a big value selling launch and then created this in-person boot camp and brought in the prospecting.
Yeah, got it. And then how big did the Mongo sales team get while you were there?
Again, I just like not great with numbers. I think the company was about 700
This is not
people.
true.
I do remember.
You're very good at numbers, but not remembering the
Yeah.
like come now. I've known you for long enough
Yeah.
to know that you were excellent at numbers. Just remembering the foot. I guess we can go back on LinkedIn and look at the sales org size over
the
time.
company was 700 people, maybe it was 200 people. I mean, it was quite a big sales
Exactly.
force, it continues to be. So
that's right. And I know that like another thing that really kind of changed at Mongo in a big way was moving from like, I guess it's kind of related to the pipe gen thing, but like moving from like a very, and I actually do want to talk about PLG stuff here in a second, but like moving from something where it was like only kind of like PLG, like order taking sort of situation, to trying to get to like more strategic conversation in the accounts that are already using like Mongo in some sort of limited capacity. Like I was talking with a sales leader from ClickUp about this earlier. We need a phrase for this, right? Like the like the bottoms up that like all, and then there's also the tops down, right? Like I like there needs to be like a terse phrase for that where it's like, hey, just because you get a foothold in an account, like, you know, MongoDB has a couple like workloads going in this organization. You're like, oh yay, they're a customer, like, you know, woohoo, we're done. It's like, no, dude, unless you get up here, right, like you're going to be at risk for like, you know, I don't know, something else to come in and like unseat that, or like maybe that person leaves and like their project goes away. And like ClickUp is another great example of this, where, you know, you can get a foothold in the organization, but you got to get up to, you know, the CIO or whoever in order to say like, hey, what's your like wall to wall productivity approach? I actually feel that that's like play is like now kind of like the bleeding edge of like sales strategy, and like and I feel that people do it poorly. We do it okay. I would not say we do it at the level that we would like to be able to do it, like both from a sales standpoint and also from a success standpoint. But I know that that was a big initiative for you guys, just to like get up here. Maybe you can kind of talk us through like how that worked. Obviously the force management thing kind of applied there, but like how did that like modify the sales motion, you know, the sales team, et cetera?
Yeah, you know, so because it was open source, it's like PLG but different. So like basically Mongo was everywhere. And we were able to, with our marketing tech, just do reverse IP lookups and be like, okay, we've got like a lot of MongoDB and JP Morgan. Like, what do we think that is? And then it was just this bit of like part like detective mission to like have the AEs that were we had a very technical sales force, they had to be, but then we of course had solution architects, kind of that next layer deeper, but like really go find that project. And usually it was just like some developers working on something, wanted to do something faster, they'd mock up a prototype, bring it to like that next level of management, be like, look what we just built in like really fast time with MongoDB, like could we think about doing this broader app? And so one of our famous like early use cases was this through MetLife Insurance. They basically created this app that like brought together all of these different sources, but it started in just that way, just like bottoms up, a developer working on it and then working it up. And then what we had to teach the team to do, because we had like a sales force that was super good at like chatting with these developers and like making this happen on the ground. And then we had to bring in this kind of methodology, which was fit workforce management, and things came in, also bringing in kind of more tenured enterprise sellers. Okay, so now how do you go sit down with the CTO and have a real conversation about what's happening? And the conversations were a little awkward, but you might not realize that this is happening in your business, but it is.
Exactly.
And because
it's
at
always,
the time, it was like all Oracle, like this was a huge shift. So that was that would if that's what you're saying that's what we did at Mongo.
Yeah. And so I think what I'm hearing here is like, yeah, it's funny because like I'm literally thinking about our sales reps right now, where, you know, they'll enter an organization through a sales manager or like a, you know, a director of sales or whatever. They'll enter through an SDR manager, because usually what ends up happening is like most of the organizations we work with, if they're small, they probably won't have any analytics in place. If they're larger, they'll probably have a legacy BI implementation that ends up, you know, like not being very comprehensible, like interpretable to you are a numbers person. Most sales managers and SDR managers, so this is changing, but like, we don't necessarily get into sales to like, play with abacuses, right? And so handing them like a wall of Tableau charts ends up being like not a great, great solution. And so what'll end up happening is like, we'll enter through that, get them set up with an HRM account. They're like, oh my God, this is like so much better than like our legacy Tableau implementation or like our Looker implementation that like we don't look at and like most of the tiles are broken. But then when you go and talk to the VP of sales or like the VP of sales operations or whatever, it's not like, hey, like, let's look at this product, right? It's just like, hey, you care about, like, it's like talking CRO, talking VP of ops versus like talking sales manager. And so making sure that the AEs can like have those those distinct conversations. I think one thing that you cited there, which is like really cool, is it's like it's like a proven use case. In this case, it's like, look at this sick app, right? That like we made here, and it's making me think about our sales motion where we'll enter an organization where like, I don't know, maybe an SDR manager is like, hey, we're trying to figure out like, it's on me to figure out, like, we've had this inbound motion and now I have these 4 outbound folks and I really got to figure this out and make sure that like, we're sufficiently multi-threading and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like we can deploy a, playbook for that really easily. Like here's a dashboard, here's alert feed, here's some goals. And then what you've got is like a prototype there, like that person's happier than like a pig in mud, right? Because like their needs are now handled. But then you take that and then go up and be like, cool, see, right? See, like we can make all your managers like that. Right. And so and I think what that is it's like going arm in arm, like getting arm in arm with your champion, right? In this case, it's a deployed champion, right? It's not a pre-deployed champion, in order to like then internally sell. And I imagine in you guys' case, probably some of those initial customers or internal users, like they're not used to selling themselves. Like,
sure. Yeah.
Like the reps are, right? But now, like this, we don't have this problem because like we sell to sellers and like they're like, like great communicators and whatever. And so, they can usually sell internally pretty well, even especially in partnership with our account executives. But helping like technical people to like advocate internally, I guess it's like champion development, can be kind of a spicy meatball. What did you guys kind of like, was there specific stuff that you guys did around that in order to kind of like help that person be the tip of the spear, like even though they're maybe not used to that?
Yeah, I mean, we were very thoughtful on our personas and like really on the marketing side nurtured very specific messaging to those personas, like really lifting up like the developer persona, for example. Like you are, making huge strides by using Mongo. And then on the selling side, really making sure they knew how to speak to those personas. And when they were doing that prospecting, like really tailoring the message to the person that they're sending them to. That was just kind of when I was there, just absolutely the motion is you cannot say the same message. And at the time too, it was a really big, like NoSQL wasn't really common, right? That now it's very, of course you're going to have like a multiple approach to how you're doing your databases, but that just, it was like, we were just disrupting. And then also like, what is this? So we really had to like land that message and educate the market. And so educating the market through educating specific personas was really big.
Yeah. And so just to make sure that I'm following, it's kind of like, it was really important because like this pipe gen Tuesdays was oftentimes generating pipe in organizations that are already customers, but maybe like land like micro customers, right? Like finger hold customers. And so what that would mean is like, okay, cool, here's this account. They've got like, they're doing some prototyping in Mongo, et cetera, et cetera. Like we were able to surface this data through, whatever. Oh my God, whatever crazy means that you did it back in the day. Nowadays, it'd be like, yeah, you just use census and you send it over to Salesforce and like, yay, everyone's happy, right? Like it's like 8 years ago, I'm sure it was just like, oh my God, like it's a disaster. But whatever that process is, and now it's like, oh, okay, cool. Now you, Mr. or Ms. AE, need to go prospect into that account, identify the VPE. Here is the VPE sales loft cadence. Here is the CTO, right? Here is the director of IT. By the way, they are different, right? The VPE, like the director of IT cares about, security and like, stability and kind of things like that. And the VPE maybe cares about like developer productivity, right?
Yeah, and we had a lot of example content for the team, but we were really big on also making them write it. So, hey, this is a message that we think will land at this persona, but now let's workshop it, in small groups and figure out how to write that, and really like celebrating that across the team so that they were like kind of always learning and developing.
Yes, I love this. I'm like literally writing this down because one of my AEs pinged me, or one of my sales managers pinged me regarding a communication that went out to someone and was like, hey, this is like okay, but it could be like this is B-, and it totally could be like A with XYZ. And like my reaction to that is like, a recovered product marketer is like, let's just template it. Like, why?
Right.
Like, I'm a big teacher as well, but like humans are humans, right? And like we're moving, especially account executives, like moving fast and like,
Yep.
trying to get like through a bunch of stuff. So like just, provide guardrails there. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about the like how Mongo's like PLG motion kind of like changed over actually, how did you guys surface usage information to the field way back in the day, pre-reverse
Yeah.
pre-census, pre-reverse ETL?
Yeah, this was an area it was just kind of, they were creating our kind of self-serve consumption-based motions. And this was like right when I was kind of heading out. So I was in the world of how do we show you usage? I think we like built a pretty wonky web app that allowed you to like put in like the domain of someone's account, and it would like turn back like a CSV. It was like nothing fancy, nor I think we tried to integrate it with Salesforce and it like immediately broke. Like, but I know they've gone leagues since then, but in my world, it was definitely a little hacky. And honestly, the marketing ops function was able to give more content because we had the ability to do reverse IP lookups on the website and things like that to send some more signals. But it was nothing
It's
fancy.
like, yeah, it's like, hey, even though we don't have like, I don't know, whatever the like specific usage might be, is like how many, gigabytes or whatever they're sending over to Mongo or whatever. It's like, yeah, we don't necessarily have that, but like, boy, this person's visiting our website a lot.
It
So like,
seems like they're busy. Yeah.
That's a good signal. Go get them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. So let's talk a little bit about like AWS, and then we'll move on to Vanta. But like, going from like this like scaling, this hyper growth startup where you're going from, I think you like the 30th employee or something like that, which must have been like, I mean, 30 employees is probably like a 5 to 10 person sales organization, and then all the way through like going public. AWS's scale is quite a bit different, like huge, right? Like 10,000 sellers or what have you. But I imagine like the pace with which like things were being implemented probably like slows down, because like you have to be way more careful and more intentional when you're doing things for like 10,000 sellers versus like rolling out pipe gen behavior to like 50 sellers or whatever. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about like how that was different and like, some of your biggest experiences there.
Yeah, so AWS, it was a fascinating experience in Switch, because although like you don't own your systems, you don't own a lot of your system-based processes. Like it's so different from being in a startup environment or really owning kind of both. I'm owning Salesforce and I'm owning how the field is using it. So you were a sales ops lead to a team, but had no control over that. And the data is highly complex because it's consumption based. And my first role there was running sales ops for New York's team that was called Territory, which is basically all of the segmentation happened above and we were like the bottom. So it was all users of AWS. And I had a group within Territory called Focused, which was like you carved out just that top layer and each rep got 1,000 accounts about. And most of where they spent their most time were the startups that were jumping. So like Datadog, for example, was one of our customers. And of course, the teams above you are trying to get your top accounts. And it was a lot of the work was just like trying to figure out how to like visualize and teach the sellers about their data and where they should be focusing and where the growth is happening. And the fascinating thing about consumption is that you're just watching the business grow as you're running, and it's trying to like help, and it's also delayed. So you're like, okay, you sold this, 3 months ago. Now we're seeing a hit. Now we think you can do this much more. So just a totally different scale and type of work, but the pace was exactly the same. That's what's so fascinating about AWS is, although you don't see those, you can't like roll out a change in Salesforce in a minute. Literally, I spent almost all my 3 years trying to make one change in Salesforce and it never happened. But like your business is growing so fast that you have to run at that pace with your sellers to make sure they're hitting their goals.
Yeah. What were the biggest like things that like you were focused on to enable the territory team, and then I know that you guys added industry team, and we can, like industry teams, we can talk about that. Like it sounds like almost the big thing with Amazon, or sorry, with the territory team was, you said 1,000 accounts. I mean,
Yeah.
geez Louise, like trying to pay attention to 1,000 accounts is just like, I mean, just beyond the pale. Like how did you help the AEs prioritize within those accounts? Like obviously Amazon has like really like has a bajillion different products, right? So like cross-selling is important, but also really hard because like you have to know the different use cases and so on and so forth. But like, so what were some of the biggest things that got worked on there?
Yeah, so I'll do the caveat. I was with that group for 6 months because the group got reorged, and they actually split that team into a startup group and then what they call digital native business. So it totally like it was going through this transformation. But in my 6 months, basically all my time was spent was forecasting. So I was just spending hours in the data and then with the team and like listening into their calls and trying to figure out like what we could forecast. And like you had to get perfect forecast was kind of the vibe. So basically forecasting and then helping them run QBRs, or kind of these, actually it was more like an MBR. So these like written documents where they talked about their top customers. So it was a bit more of like, it was almost like a research role, research and analysis more than like operations. It was very, very different. After those 6 months, I then went to a group that was being started, and that was industry based. So it started with a couple hundred people, about 6 industries. And then by the time I left, it was 2,500 plus people. I think we'd gotten to 8 industries. And that was just fascinating because we were pulling all those top accounts out of the business. And it was a very focused enterprise sale. It was like, you've got Volkswagen, like how do you go every single layer down with Volkswagen, like across their whole business?
Right. And how did you approach that? Because like, I mean, that's like a huge, especially like, I'm trying to remember, it's one of our customers. Oftentimes I get pulled into sales strategy conversations with our customers that like that are like totally like unrelated to Atrium. So we're like, hey, could we talk with Pete about like, territory planning, or in this case, it would be like account hierarchy or what have you. How did you guys go about that? Was it just like, here's all the different sub accounts within here, and then like map out the products that they're using versus not, or how did you approach that?
It's messy. They're building, they continue to build better tools, but like talk about a company that you build something and it's broken by the time it launches because the growth is so big. But a lot of the work can actually be done through AWS Account ID. So you kind of got that like central starter account ID and everything flows off of that, or you can like work with the different like AWS accounts to bring it all together. Salesforce, like it was always a journey of trying to make sure those hierarchies were right, and it didn't always totally make sense like how it was set up. But the interesting thing about that time is I actually wasn't a sales ops leader in that role. I was focused on our solution architects and partner teams. So it was like kind of a totally different space that I lived in for 2.5 years, like trying to actually figure out how do you make SAs more effective.
Oh, it's even hard. It's even like harder.
It's super hard. There's no revenue, and you're not like at Amazon. Those technical roles were not to be tied to revenue. It was customer focus. Forget about the numbers. And so it was a very interesting. My brain like got a whole new kind of perspective on things, trying to figure that out for 2.5 years.
How did you measure their performance though? Because I remember so we did about 150 customer interviews when we started Atrium in 2016. And one of the, I remember having this like wonderful conversation with Zach Larick, who ran sales engineering at Optimize. he's now at Slack. He's a former boxer. So like, Box sales diaspora, Mongo sales diaspora, LinkedIn sales diaspora. One of the things that like we get the like the benefit of is like you start identifying these diasporas. You're like, ooh, pretty much anyone who like has that on their resume is like pretty rad, right? Anyway, so it's like Zach is super rad, like most former boxers. And he was telling me about how they created a custom object in Salesforce in order to like essentially do it was essentially like a sales engineering like lump of work, right? It was like they didn't call it a lump of work, but it's like it was a custom object, and it was just like a sales engineering ticket, right? And then there were like subtypes within it, and then also it was, I mean, I guess it was kind of like Jira in this regard, insofar as like they would put like, I think they actually like put like hours of effort in it. Like it was a demo setup, it was like this many hours or whatever. Maybe it was like a call that like they wrote along on, or so on and so forth. But at least like what you can do is you can like model work. And I think there was probably an association. I think those were actually, they were related to the op as well, such that you could then do some like reporting after the fact, where it's like, like we're even in the case that you're kind of talking about, which is like, hey, look, we don't want to connect this to revenue because we don't want people to like be ignoring deals that don't have, or like ignoring customers that don't have, deals attached to them. But like, you still want to understand, like, are your sales engineers busy, or are they like golfing, right? And was there any like, how did you guys approach that with like the solutions architects of like instrumenting, or did you like, were you able to kind of instrument that, the kind of like the quantity of like work output?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we absolutely tried to instrument it. And the way that like more of a territory type of model team, they had Salesforce tasks and like this whole kind of system within Salesforce. But in our world, it actually was really tough, because it was like it any time away from the customer, because these customers were so big, was like a detriment to the SA. So like if they were to spend time logging tasks, like, but then they like spent 2 straight days re-architecting an entire like approach, it's like that work was more important than logging the tasks. So we actually didn't have consistency, especially across, it was like one sales team, but like 8 teams within it. So each team had a different culture. But the thing about at Amazon, there's a lot of like recognition for work and customer impact that comes in a couple of different ways, mainly written up. And so it was very actually cultural. Easy to just culture. Like you knew the essays that were crushing it because they were being called up in stories.
It was like an echo.
And
yeah, it was like you knew that this person was like taking care of business and kicking ass, because like invariably other people would like it. Yeah, it was kind of like instrumentation it was like second order instrumentation via osmosis in this case, where it's like, man, kudos to, like, we have a Slack kudos channel, and where it's like, oh man, like Meg keeps getting kudos for like running like super rad demos, like, and you're like, okay, I keep seeing Meg in the in the solutions architect kudos channel there. Got it. One way that we've approached that, since yes, like logging tasks is fussy, we have got, and I think this kind of goes to the idea of like, you do an MVP on something, and then like once it's like, all right, this like smells good, right? Like this is working, then you can kind of like tighten it up and make it, and then like refine it. This is a customer success thing. So one of the things, again, because like Atrium can be used for a variety of different use cases, and it's like different on a per team basis or what have you. One of the things that we did in order to make things a lot easier for our customer success team is just have like a catalog of plays, because like a CS playbook, where it's like, a dozen or so, or it's like, sorry, not a dozen, sorry, it's like a couple dozen things where it's like AE ramping, SDR ramping, AE pipeline hygiene, AE prospecting, right? Like SDR quality, QBRs, right? Like board reporting, blah, 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 blah. And so one, like having those recipes declared was really important. But then once those recipes were declared, we created a task type called like customer success play. And then there's a pick list of the different play types, but logging tasks manually through the manual UI, like super sucky. So what we did was we created a button on the contact object with a flow. So literally all the like, the customer success person like has a meeting with like, I don't know, like the mid-market AE manager at like, some organization that has like eight AE managers that are using Atrium. And what he or she is able to do is be like, okay, cool. Like these are the things that we did in this meeting. We deployed an AE ramping playbook, and we deployed a AE prospecting, and then it's just like click and like a couple of notes, and then like record it, and then it persists off onto both the contact object and of course the account object. And then what's great about it from a QBR standpoint is because then you can come back to it later on and be like, here's everything that's been done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great. We'll take it.
Yeah, but then what ends up happening is like, but it's got to be easy, right? Because like we deployed this, and we're like having the CSMs do it, and it was because like manually logging tasks was so fussy, and then once we refined it to make it like a button and a flow, it was just like dink, right?
Yeah.
Which of course drives better outcomes. And actually our head of customer success, because she's so sharp, was like, we should probably do this on the sales team as well. And I was like, that's a really good point, because if you think about it, any given sales motion is kind of like a branching, choose your own adventure thing. And so at different points in time, you have to do like different like football moves. And so like logging the fact that like, oh, we did the executive alignment introduction here, or in this situation I did XYZ, is something that we might be thinking about doing next. I want to talk about Vanta, because like you went from like super scaled sales organization in the form of AWS, and now Vanta is kind of like, it's back to the future, where super scaling. I mean, obviously it's like more scaled than when you joined Mongo, but it's probably a similar situation to like when like if like sales operations leadership came into Mongo like 5 years into their journey, and I imagine there's like, it's a very different ball of wax when you're showing up and you're trying to like bring order to chaos, maybe not chaos, but like, identifying kind of like the biggest areas where things are, things need to be glowed up, and like which things are like really broken versus which things are like semi broken. Maybe you can kind of talk about how you've approached like that assessment and prioritization. And then also, I think you have a pretty muscular team at this point, that you put together. Maybe you can talk about like building that team out.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's so much to do. And I think you said this earlier, right? There's infinite things to do at a startup. And so my big focus coming in was like, how do I put the right people in the right places and allow for a focus into specific areas of business, and like a hyper focus and a holistic approach, right? So I've got kind of across my team, I've got someone that just runs systems and has that dedicated systems team, right? So they're thinking every day about Salesforce and Gong and all the connected points, right? And they run on sprints, and they've got tickets, right? And then you've got enablement, and they're just doing the enablement programs for the field. And then with operations, really breaking out each part of the business and putting an operations layer to it. So partner, marketing, customer success, sales. And my ask to all my leaders is like, think of yourself as like a chief operating officer to the leader, to the business you support, because I want folks to be really, really thoughtful and deep and make sure that their teams are kind of deployed in the right areas. And so that, like, I think that kind of, I learned that type of kind of, I think, framing and approach actually from Amazon, from their like, dozens of years of training sales ops folks. And I think it's working really well. There's always so many priorities and so much going on, but when you can build up subject matter expertise within your domain, within your team, you're going to be getting that like kind of much deeper and like into the business and to drive those results. I think we're still figuring out how to prioritize. I mean, there is so much to do. There's like super foundational pieces, and then there's like just keep like, turning the engine for sales and CS. So, it's still a work in progress 3 months in.
But I think the important thing there is like a really like, how many sellers does Vanta have now? It's like 50 or something.
So, no,
look on LinkedIn.
Yeah, look on LinkedIn.
Yeah. But like, a pretty large sales organization, and the same with like customer success organization as well. So making sure that like you have business partners set up, right?
Yep.
Which is what you were kind of talking about. Exactly. Like, hey, this is our CS ops person, this is our sales ops person, this is our, marketing ops person. Because then like they'll be like swimming in the Kool-Aid with those folks and becoming more intimate with like the needs of a customer success function, the needs of a sales, sales function or whatever. And then they're probably also the ones that are going to start collecting that information. Like, oh, I keep seeing this bug over here in CS land.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
we don't see that in sales land. Or like, oh, we see this bug across marketing and sales in CS land and partner land. And, and then, collecting that. How are you guys, do you guys use I think you said there was a ticketing system for the systems folks, and that's probably like need a report or like need a field or,
bug,
like, yeah, like all that's exactly validation rule, not allowing me to close win this. Damn it.
Right.
That's everyone's favorite.
I was like, that came up today.
Weird. It always happens. Yeah, especially when it has like a really like inarticulate error message, which is like pretty much always the case, right? those are the best. Oh, I can't close win this right now. There's just like some red text here that looks like it's like Apex vomit. Wonderful. Are you guys doing any sort of like structured collection of like those outside of the ticketing thing? That's more kind of like point solution. I meant like collecting the requirements from from the business, from the teams that the business partners support.
Yeah, so I really like for those business partners, their responsibility to be listening to the field, kind of summarizing, collecting that feedback, and either is it an enablement problem, is it a systems problem, is it like a systems thing or a process thing that they need to address? I would say, I think we're starting to figure out the right cadence in forums of like, having kind of like team meeting attendance, or is it, even just like sharing our roadmap and like, hey, this is what we're prioritizing. Does that make sense? Does that resonate? We're doing a ton of work since our sales management layer is kind of developing and evolving, doing a ton of work with those second line, frontline managers, and really like trying to get feedback from them as we think about what we're doing.
Yeah, one thing that pops to mind, it's funny, like on the like making it simple thing, one of our kind of like sub plays for the customer success team is what we call a product request. It's like complicated. It's like, some customers like, oh man, like we've used up our 8 custom fields in Atrium. Can we have 8 more? And it's just like, it's important to log those things. And then but in this case, the CS team can do it like really, really, really easily because of the button and the flow and whatever. But then importantly, downstream, there's emails that fire off from a workflow rule standpoint, and also we use troops to fire it off to like a product feedback channel. And then of course, like we have a customer stoke channel where that people like put just like customer stoke stuff, so like high NPS scores, or like you get off a call and someone like talks about how stoked they are on Atrium, you like grab the chorus clip. And then we actually have a customer success play type called a VBO, a verified business outcome, where it's just like we put points on the board, like, hey, this organization, like this sales team this AE team had like major pipeline hygiene problems, and they instrumented, they put goals around it, they did an initiative around it, and oh, look at that, their untouched ops like went down to like nothing, and like, oh look, their win rates went up, look at that. That's like a verified business outcome. And so like that fires over there as well. I bet you could maybe do something similar, where it's essentially like an internal feature request, right, just to make it like super easy for the folks to what do you guys use for to do stuff over there? Do you guys use Asana or like ClickUp, or what do you guys use?
Like project management, or in particular? Yeah, there's definitely some Asana out there. I think our marketing team is on Asana, and then like Jira for ticketing. I would say like project management is maybe not like as been robust of a built out like function, but I also feel like project management tooling is only as good as you want it to be, and sometimes Excel just works fine.
Well, I was on the topic of capture. One of the things that we did, so one of our account executives, Max, actually used to work at Asana, and he's like a really like operationally minded guy. And so that thing I was talking about earlier, the like free account setup process thing, where we like hand it off to BizOps and they do the data checks, that used to be like all email based. And then one of the cool features of Asana is like you can actually have forms, right? So you just like you can log something, just make it like super. So at this point, the AEs just like they all have it bookmarked, where it's like as soon as they get it off a disco call where they turned on like a free Atrium account for a customer, they're immediately like, all right, now I'm just gonna like go ahead and log this, we call it a fast free account setup process, and like it's just done. But the good news is it just like pumps into the associated project. So that might be something to check out. Wonderful. Well, guess what, Meg? We're out of time. It's pretty fun, huh?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
I learned so much. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out. I've learned now. I'm rounding out my understanding of like the Mongo, like the history of the Mongo sales organization. Now that I've like, who have I talked to on this front? I guess like Mark Fields, who's now at Yellow Brick, the Atrium customer. Justin Dignelli was actually on Power Hour a few weeks ago, and so now you. So this is lovely. So thanks for folks for joining us here today. We're gonna have Ralph Barcy, the head of SDR from Trey, the VP of Global Insights from Trey.io. He's gonna be joining us next week, so that come on and show up and we can talk about managing 50-person SDR organization. Sounds like a lot of fun, huh? It's like it's its own brand of chaos. Meg, thank you very much and have a great rest of your day. Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.